We are recording and we'll make it available on our website. So welcome everyone. I am Catherine Stanley. I am the LTAP program coordinator. So just so you guys know, the Minnesota Roadway Maintenance Training and Demo Day is sponsored by Minnesota LTAP, the Minnesota Department of Transportation, Minnesota Local Road Research Board, and the Federal Highway Administration in partnership with the American Public Works Association Minnesota chapter and the Minnesota Street Superintendent Association. So LTAP is a program designed to provide local transportation agencies with the tools for improving operations. LTAP's ultimate goal is to foster a safe, efficient, environmentally sound transportation system by improving skills and knowledge of local transportation providers through training, events, demonstrations, technical assistance, and technology transfer. So Minnesota LTAP, we offer a variety of training opportunities throughout the year. These include annual events like the Demo Day, which is typically we rotate around the state and it's just one full day of education and demonstrations. There's also the Fall Maintenance Expo, the APW Fall Workshop, and we offer one-day workshops throughout the year as well. Some examples are asphalt pavement rehab. We also have a culvert installation and maintenance on gravel roads. And we also have a variety of online courses and webinars that are recorded and available year-round. So LTAP has a variety of newsletters, reference documents, videos, and a website, services, and technical document searches. We also champion innovation. So Minnesota LTAP supports local agency innovations through two programs. We have the Build a Better Mousetrap and the OPERA, which stands for the Operational Research Assistance Program. So if you're unfamiliar with these two programs, the Mousetrap is a national competition where entry can be anything from the development of tools or gadgets to equipment modifications, anything that improves safety, efficiency, reduces costs, or improves the quality of transportation. So the purpose of this competition is to collect and disseminate real-world examples of best practices, tips for the field, and to assist in transfer of technology. And then our winners are submitted on the National Recognition Program. They recently changed it from competition to recognition program, where you then compete with all the other states in all their local submissions. Our second program is the OPERA, and this provides funding to develop your ideas. So we provide for projects up to $20,000 through a request for proposal process. Proposed projects should focus on the timely development of relevant ideas or methods that improve transportation or maintenance operations. And you can visit our website for more information on both of those programs. And I would like to take a moment just to congratulate our 2020 Rhodes Scholar graduates. In lieu of an in-person training, this is I'd like just to recognize their hard work over the past several years. And if you're new to Zoom, this is the meeting platform. Along the bottom, you have a black ribbon. There's the mute along the left. You can unmute yourself during the question sections. Otherwise, stay muted. Again, you have the option of showing your video. During the presentation, it doesn't matter since you're just going to be seeing Brian's presentation. You can see all the participants that are here today and chat. This is where we want you to submit questions. As I said, we have designated times to answer questions, but as soon as you think of them, please submit them so we have them. And then also screen sharing. This is live for everyone. Again, you won't have to touch that. This presentation is being recorded, and feel free to use reactions that you want. And then way on the right-hand corner, the leave button. If you need to leave at any time, that's where you hit. And that's all I have today. Again, welcome everyone for coming today. And I'm going to hand it over to Brian Barrett for today's presentation on load securement and CDL updates.
Thanks, Catherine. Appreciate the opportunity to present here. Okay, I assume I have my screen up and everybody.
Yep, it's up.
Okay, good. Well, good morning, everyone. Some of you might actually know me, but just as a quick overview, I work for the Minnesota Department of Transportation in the training department, and I have now been training for over 25 years. And most all of our training that I do surrounds heavy equipment, commercial motor vehicles. I write e-learning and I run a website. So a lot of different material, all related to maintenance type work. And just so you know, I worked out in the field in maintenance for a number of years and trained. And then before that, worked in the private industry as a commercial motor vehicle operator, equipment operator, things like that. So the history is all in equipment. Today, we're here to talk about cargo securement requirements and updates and changes in CDL driving rules. I will start with the driving rules. And the reason I do this is over the years, I've seen that people who hold commercial motor vehicle licenses generally have tripping points, meaning there's things that they either need clarification for them or they have problems trying to understand it. So those are the areas that I focus on here, and then we'll get into the cargo securement. So I'm going to start by talking about some recent changes, things that have occurred, and then in the license structure, and then move into the cargo securement. I believe you should have received a copy of the presentation if you have that, and then I also did send a handout, and I will be referring to that because there is some pertinent information in there, and all that information is not in this presentation. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is license standards. So this is, Minnesota was way behind in accepting this federal regulation, but we're there now, and we're trying to get it to work right. So what we're talking about here is the three types of license that are used for identification and lawful driving. So I'm going to only talk about the differences in the license because that's mainly what we want to talk about. So the first one would be that the standard driver's license not acceptable for domestic flights or federal use after October 2021. Now, again, some of these dates are moving because they keep changing this on us. But essentially what they're saying is when you renew your license, you're going to get a different type and you got to decide what type you want. So the standard license will not be usable if you want to get on a plane after that date. Then we have the enhanced driver's license. I think this is probably the one that works good for a lot of people. And so used for domestic air travel to access federal facilities. Now, maybe we're not accessing federal facilities, but ours is that domestic air travel deal. Can be used at U.S. border crossing document by land or sea, and is only issued to U.S. citizens. And then finally, we have the Real ID. And so this one is used for domestic air travel and access federal facilities. It can be issued to both U.S. and non-U.S. citizens. And so it cannot be used for border crossing documents. So just when you decide what you're going to do, if you haven't already done so, this is what you should be looking at. What are you going to do with it besides just your CDL? And then make a decision about how you want to use it. And then, of course, you should get online in your state and look at what documents you have to provide for this, because this is really in depth, would be a good way to put it. So even if you have had a name change, like, maybe you got married and you had a name change, now you have to prove your name to even get into this. So, you'd come up with a marriage certificate or something like that. So anyway, there's a lot of documents. You can see this online through the commercial motor vehicle side or even the regular side of DVS, Driver Vehicle Services. Okay, then we also have the license structure for CDL. And I like to talk about this because, again, some confusion in how it is laid out and what happens. So this is a flow chart that is actually in the CDL manual online. So you could actually look at this online as well through DVS. But a couple things about this. This is a flow chart to figure out what commercial motor vehicle license you need, if any. I've also have the CDL restrictions on the left. I'm going to talk about restrictions in an upcoming slide here. And then we have the CDL endorsements. And most people are familiar with a lot of these, but the CDL restrictions are a bit confusing. And then what license I need is a confusing part. So we go through this by looking at the top and top left that says, okay, is my vehicle or combination of vehicles over 26,000 pounds? So that's the very first question that we would ask. And if it is, then we move into that, okay, is a towed unit over 10,001 pounds? That is because any trailer over 10,001 pounds trips in the Class A license. So here's where we get confused. So I'm not going to go through this whole thing. I'm sure it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to use a piece of equipment that's normal in our work that causes tripping points for us. So think about this. If I were to say that you guys are going to take out a Ford F550, generically at MnDOT here, we might just call it a 1-ton, whether it's an actual 1-ton or not. But a Ford F550 is grossed at 19,000 pounds. And you can tell by this chart that you have to know the gross vehicle weight rating of the equipment you're using. So the way this works out is either the actual weight or whatever the vendor prescribed as the gross weight on the sticker. So in other words, if you overload it, they're going to take that weight if they're weighing you. So just be aware of that. But let's say that we have this Ford F550, 19,000 pounds, and we have a trailer grossed at 10,001 pounds. So our gross combination weight rating is 29,000 pounds. When you look at the top of this flow chart, you would arrive at a Class A, correct? So that's what would happen. The combination is over 26, the trailer is over 10, or actually over 10,001, so it's a Class A. Now here's where we trip up. If I take that same F550, so 19,000 pounds gross vehicle weight rating, and I put a trailer behind it, grossed at 8,000 pounds. So I have a total of 27,000 pounds. What license do I need? So now if I go through this chart again, I'm over the 26,000 pounds, so I say yes, but then it asks me, is the trailer over 10,000 pounds? The answer is no. So the next one down is a gross vehicle weight rating of the power unit, 26,001 pounds or more. The answer is no, it's 19,000. So then is the vehicle transporting hazardous materials? No. Is it designed for 16 passengers? No. So no CDL required. So to make sure we're clear here, for a Class A, there are two requirements. The combination has to exceed 26,000 pounds, and the towed unit has to be over 10,000 pounds. For a Class B, there's one requirement. The power unit has to be more than 26,000 pounds. So we disregard the towed units under 10,000 pounds in that situation. And then, of course, a Class C is a placardable or passengers. So again, this flow chart is in the CDL manual. So you should be able to get at it if you need it. But just remember, if you're going to start hooking up trailers over 10,001 pounds, you should be aware that there are some tripping points there, and it's going to depend on the vehicle that you're going to tow that trailer with. So just be aware of that. So in other words, that backing up to do the overview of this, that F550 could classify as a Class A or as no type of commercial motor vehicle. It could be either. It's based on the trailer. Kind of confusing. People trip over that one. Okay, then we also have restrictions. That was in my previous slide as well. But when we talk about restrictions, I'm only going to talk about the ones that affect us the most. So the first one is the air brake restriction L on the license. And so this would be actually on the license of the operator that has this. And that would mean that either they failed the written test when they took it at the testing station, and also they did not test in a commercial motor vehicle with air brakes. Okay, so then you would be restricted. You cannot drive an air brake vehicle. That's what that means. Then there's a full air brake restriction, the Z category. That just means that when you took the test, you probably did it in an air over hydraulic. It wasn't a straight air system only. So then they restrict you from driving a full air system. So be aware of that when you test. And then one of the big ones for us is the manual transmission restriction. That's if you go to the testing station and get your license with automatic transmission. And then finally, the tractor trailer. These are the four main ones. So for us, generally in the type of work we do, you'd show up with a dump truck of some type, either a single axle or a tandem, and you probably have a pintle hook with a trailer on it. So if you want a Class A, that trailer's got to be over 10,000 pounds rated. Okay. And then if it was an automatic transmission, you would be restricted from the manual transmission and from the tractor trailer. The only way to get a full Class A now, in this day and age, is to go into the tractor trailer with a manual transmission. Okay, then you could get a full Class A. So just be aware how that works. And of course, hopefully you've already seen the statement on the bottom. So remember that if you got a CDL before 2015, before this all started, you were grandfathered in. So you have the full Class A, you can still drive anything. Okay, it's just when the law was implemented. Okay, then we also have the CDL self-renewal, and that is another one that people are having problems with. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because we've had people that have actually lost their CDL license because of something that they did wrong when they went and either renewed or didn't renew. So we'll go through this quickly. So this is required by, of course, the feds and the state again. They use this information, the self-certification form, to identify you as a person, identify your driving record, determine your eligibility for a driver's license, and to prevent fraud and access your records for compliance with state and federal regulations. So that's kind of the enforcement side of it right there. Government employees are defined as working in interstate commerce. So I want to take a moment just to clarify this because, again, very confusing. And you could have people in your institution saying they disagree with this. And I don't want to argue with anybody, but in my many years of doing this, I'm pretty much a regulation expert as well. And I have direct contacts with State Patrol. So, and that would be in the enforcement side and on the commercial motor vehicle enforcement and inspection side. So I got the people that I can talk to make sure I know what I'm talking about, I guess is a good way to put it. But if you're a government employee, generally you're interstate. And the reason is it's right in the federal regulations where it states government entities work in commerce by the federal definition. And if you work in commerce, it means you are interstate. So it doesn't matter whether you cross state lines or not. That's another one of the definitions is if you cross state lines. And then another definition of interstate is the commerce you're carrying. So if something comes across state lines and then you pick it up and haul it somewhere, that means you're continuing the commerce. And that was across state lines. So that's another way to define us as interstate. So anyway, that's how we get there, saying that we're interstate. Now, the other side of this is we're exempt from the medical examination requirements. Your institution might require you to have that. That's allowable. But as far as the federal system is concerned, you're exempt. And that works at the state level as well. So what does all that mean? You got to choose the right category when you're renewing your CDL. And this is going to happen every 4 years. You've got to fill out the self-certification and do it right. Or if you have a change in license or a change in what you're doing with your license. So this is a Minnesota form. Just a caution, again, if there's other states doing this training, this is Minnesota specifically. So they might call it something different than category 1, 2, 3, 4. The definitions are very similar, but sometimes the terms they use called out by state are different. So just be aware of that. But there still are 4 categories. So I'm going to concentrate on the part of the form that you have to fill out and do it correctly. The rest is pretty easy. It's just filling in boxes with your name and license number. So you have to certify when you renew your license every 4 years, what category you belong in. The one that I'm mentioning is category 2. So exempt interstate, meaning you work in interstate commerce, but you're exempt from the medical examination. So that's what you should be checking when you fill out this form. Now be careful, because the other side of this is, okay, if my CDL changes, or if I'm doing something different, not just my job with the government. So if your medical interstate or intrastate status changes, you must provide DVS with a new self-certification form. And then of course, if now you're medically required to do the physical, you're going to have to show that as well. You got to keep the information up to date. If you don't, your license could be downgraded. So what I mean by that is if you work for your entity, your government entity, and you decide that you're going to work for a private contractor on weekends, you would no longer be in category 2. You'd probably be in category 1, and now you have to have a health card. You have to change this form. Conversely, if you are doing that and you say, I'm done with all this extra weekend work, right? And you're saying, I'm just going to work for my government entity here. So you downgrade it to the category 2. So you don't need your CDL health card for that. But what happens if you decide you're going to go drive for a private contractor for one day because you want to go make money? You got to change it again. So the problem here is if you don't fill it out right, and you end up not having a health card because they're watching that as well. So if you put yourself in category 1, and then you let your health card expire because you just started working for the government only, they would look at that and the state would send you a letter, and hopefully you find it and don't toss it in the garbage, because what it's going to tell you is this information is incorrect. If you do not correct it and provide your health card, we're downgrading your license. And if you don't catch that, they will downgrade your license, and you'll actually have a Class D license driving around a commercial motor vehicle and not even know it. So they will notify you, but it's where are you living? Did you get it? And did you just think it was junk mail? It's probably the best way to put that. So they have to match up. That's what I'm saying. If you are listed and you checked off the interstate required health card, then you have to keep your health card up to date. If you don't, they're going to find out and they will downgrade you. So just be aware of that. Okay, another training. This is the new, we'll call it CDL training, but it's coming up here. It's already been delayed 2 years. So now the implementation date is February 2022. So we're about a little bit over 6 months out yet. This is a mandatory CDL training with curriculum that's required in all 50 states. Training must be delivered by a registry provider, meaning the whole idea that you take somebody with a permit and put them in the cab of a truck with a licensed driver, CDL driver, will no longer be allowed. It has to be accredited training through a registered training provider through the feds. And this required training would apply to first-time CDL applicants applying for a Class A or B CDL, CDL holders seeking an upgrade. So if you have a Class B and you want to move to Class A, you will have to attend this training. And then the other ones are obtaining the hazardous materials passed through school, bus endorsement on their license. Okay, here's the deal. Probably all of you out there have a commercial motor vehicle license. The question you should be asking yourself is, if you have a Class B CDL and you're thinking you're going to want a Class A, or your institution is going to want that at some point, you should be trying to get that now. Because once we hit February 7th of 2022, you can no longer just train and get that license. You will have to go through an accredited institution through the feds, which could be your entity. I don't know if you decide to do that. Be trained, And just the upgrade from a Class B to a Class A is approximately 50 hours. There are required trainings you have to go through whether you know it or not, hands-on skills as well as classroom. It's got to be recorded, handed to the feds. They tell the state, and then you can go in and take your license test to get your license. So that one's coming up here in about 6 months. Again, it's not affecting CDL holders unless you're going to try to upgrade from the B to the A. So I try to get that done before that date comes up, if that's what you're thinking you'd like anyway. Be a lot easier. Okay, so I'm going to jump out of that a little bit and just talk about distracted driving for a second. And that's again because of who we are. So you folks all have heard plenty about distracted driving, and I'm listing the main ones on the bottom of the screen there, right? Cell phone calls, texting. You probably already know this. Texting is illegal for everybody, including us. Cell phones can be used by government entities in a CDL. We have an exemption. I would highly caution you on doing that, and you're about to see why, okay? So let's look at this. I do have 3 videos in this presentation. None of them have sound. Sound wasn't important. It's just looking at what's happening. I'm going to play this video, and then it's going to go back up, and it's going to go in slow motion for a short piece of time. I want you to look at what happened here. And then I want you to think about, no matter what happened in regarding to the distraction, I want you to realize what's happening to the other vehicles around there, because there's a lot of detail in here that's interesting. Hopefully you'll catch it. So let's go ahead and look at this. By the way, this is a bit painful to watch. Okay, so clearly driver distraction or a really fatigued driver, and he was falling asleep, something. And the commercial motor vehicle that captured this video obviously was aware of what's going on because he didn't get involved at all and saw it coming. Okay, now we're going to show, look at the vehicles in front of that dump truck. Anybody see brake lights? A little bit there, second vehicle up. Okay, why am I saying that? It's important to realize that when we talk about driver distraction, we're always focusing on us, okay? But please realize those 2 vehicles behind that tractor trailer that got rear-ended, in other words, the 2 vehicles that the dump truck hit, if they would have left an out, in other words, not got bumper to bumper in there and would have seen that truck coming at them, so again, not distracted and watching around their vehicle, they might have avoided that crash. They could have either moved out left or right and moved down the road. So either shoulder or that left driving lane and got out of there before they got hit. Kind of a tall order, but I want you to realize distracted driving includes you sitting there, not doing nothing. So if that's when you pick up your phone to quick look at a text or to quick look at something, not the time to do it, folks. We have to realize how dangerous this is. And the idea, you know, if you look at the numbers for this, they are actually quite frightening. So if you think about COVID and all that we've heard about that, and again, I'm not taking anything away from that, but please understand, when we start talking about numbers and people involved, this last year in 2020, we had over 41,000 deaths on our roadways in this nation. 41,000. Okay, and it's gone up over 4,000 in the last 3-4 years, and it really jumped this last year, and it's probably because of speed and less vehicles on the road. But we seriously injure 4.6 million people a year on our roadways. So that's at a cost. They're estimating the cost of $414 billion. When you wonder why your insurance costs so much and all the safety features that go into these vehicles, This is why. Okay, it all makes sense when you look at what's happening to us. It's more of a, do you think this is a right or do you think this is a privilege? So that's all I want to say about distracted driving. Just be mindful that it's kind of death and mayhem out there. So pay attention. That's the best thing I can tell you. All right, so let's look at, because I just mentioned an exemption. So we have a number of exemptions. You probably know what they are. We're exempt from the hours of service. We're exempt from the medical card. We're exempt from, we can't use a cell phone in a commercial motor vehicle. So let's look at what happens, because I want you to understand what an exemption means. So, okay, phone use driving a CMV, can you be ticketed? Now, the answer for government entities would be no, because just using the cell phone is not against the law. We are exempt. We can actually do that. But please, please try not to. Okay, so phone use driving a commercial motor vehicle and you're involved in a crash or you break a law. So if that dump truck that we just saw was one of us and we were on the cell phone, what would that mean, right? So could you be ticketed? Well, of course you could. So keep in mind that once something bad happens, that's when it's triggered and all kinds of things start. So you would get a distracted driving violation and you'd have to be proven negligent, right? And how are they going to do that? Okay, cell phone records are audited. Now, again, very confusing, because can you use a cell phone? Yes. But if it was a contributing factor to this crash, it now becomes distracted driving and it was part of the cause. They're going to look at your training records and see how you were trained and whether you trained on using a cell phone or not, or what you were supposed to be doing. And of course, the policies will be audited. So does your institution say, I don't care what the regulation says. I don't care if the regulation says you're exempt. You guys will not use a cell phone in my company. So for me, DOT, okay? And if MnDOT said that, then I better follow it, because now it's an institutional policy. So you got to remember that this mainly goes to the driver because they're driving, so it means you're a CDL, but then you also have to worry about what happens in the institution, because we are in a litigious society and commercial motor vehicles, whenever they get in a crash, whether it's their fault or not, are seen as the ones who caused it. So now we're open to the interpretation of courts and attorneys. And please, people, understand that I've been deposed 4 times in my career here. 1 for a fatality, 3 related to training. So I know how this stuff works, and I know how the lawyers work, and it's not a easy process to go through, might be the way to say it. The best thing to do would be to avoid it at all costs. So if that's what it takes to remember that, don't pick up that cell phone, then use whatever you need. But distractions are just too prevalent in our current society. All right, so I'm going to jump out of that. I'm going to move into the cargo securement, and I'm going to talk, it's cargo securement, but what you have to remember is really the way the regulations are defined and what occurs here is we're talking about acting forces. So a couple graphics of 2 areas. The one in Oakdale, I know plenty about, but in both these graphics that you see, what actually happened here was the securement devices didn't hold, so they were not adequate. Brakes were applied. The equipment was large. It rolled up onto the drive wheels of the tractor trailer and propelled the equipment over the cab and crushed the drivers. But we've seen equipment laid out on its side. We've seen equipment just roll off the trailer. And of course, in this instance, it killed the operators. So serious stuff. We have to know it isn't just, the idea isn't just I'm secured. Okay, the thought process should be, am I secured safely within the spirit of the regulation? And then how do I feel about it? In other words, okay, yeah, maybe it's good enough, even related to regulations, but does it hurt to throw another binder on there? That's how we should be thinking. It's a form of defensive driving, okay? So let's get into it. Securement requirements. All commercial motor vehicles must be loaded and equipped and the cargo secured to prevent the cargo from leaking, spilling, blowing, falling from the motor vehicle. That is a Minnesota statute. So we have the federal rules telling us what we have to do, commodity specific for us. And then we also have a state statute in Minnesota that says, hey, nothing blowing, leaking, falling off that vehicle, period. Okay. Here's an example. Again, I've already told you, I work with State Patrol, so I get all the good pictures. So here's State Patrol. They have the operator pulled over, and this is about thought process right here of the driver, of the commercial motor vehicle operator. So this load has obviously shifted going down the road. And this operator should have never gotten this far with it without either correcting it or getting help. But so now patrol's behind him. This is where he is. And he says, well, I'm at my delivery point. I made it. I'm just going to come up around the corner here to the right and everything will be fine. I'll be in private property. Understanding how vehicle dynamics work when you load equipment and move equipment is extremely important. So in this case, we just trashed the trailer and I'm not even sure what the commodity or cargo was, if that's any good, but just by turning a corner, the dynamics, the weight shift caused the load to tip over. When all he really had to do was just pull forward 50 feet, 30 feet, go up and get the forklift, pushed it back over or unload it right there. Again, how do we think? It's good enough. Or, yeah, I better be careful. And then finally on the bottom there should be no loose items on a trailer deck. It doesn't matter what you have on your trailer or on your truck. If it's not self-contained, it should not be just floating there. That includes even the chains and binders that you would use to tie down equipment. They are not supposed to be resting in the middle of a fifth wheel deck driving down the road. That would be unsecured. I actually had patrol send me pictures of one of our guys that did that, by the way. Told me I better talk to him. Okay, 3 forms of securement that we need to talk about in general. Cargo and equipment must be protected from movement forward, rearward, and laterally. Now, this automatically starts to work in our heads, and I'm going to try to point these areas out to you because they are important when I get to the slide. But understand that the cargo cannot move. Whatever that cargo is, whatever you're hauling, it doesn't matter. It could be commodity specific, like heavy equipment. It could be 2x4s. It could be shovels and rakes. Doesn't matter. Wheelbarrow, okay, does not move. Now, when we talk about regulations, they start calling out, okay, these directions. But remember, the overall comment is that it can't move anywhere. But then they start going into forward, rearward, and laterally. Okay. Got to be protected from moving in those directions. And then if not fully enclosed, a downward securement force must be applied. Well, most all of our heavy equipment is not fully enclosed. It's sitting on a trailer. So what they're saying is there's got to be some type of downward force as well to stop it from moving up. So it's not just forward, rearward, side to side. Can't move up either. Then finally, these are the overall requirements, right? The number and strength of the tie downs must be sufficient for the weight of the cargo and or equipment. So the number of tie downs and the strength of those tie downs. It's just not any tie down. Again, they have rules here, and that's what we're going to talk about. All right, so here's one from State Patrol. You might hear some video noise on from my room here, but again, you don't need to hear what they're really saying. What you should be looking at is the picture here and what actually happens when the brakes are applied on this particular vehicle. So right now they're just walking around the vehicle showing the securement devices. Look at those. So there can be no adjustment in the back of that trailer. What do they do in the front? And then what they're going to do is say, okay, go ahead and move the vehicle forward and apply the brakes. So they're looking for something specific when they do that. Watch the chains. And then they'll have them do it again. And my video froze. Okay. Well, it does the same thing. So what does this mean? Because those chains moved and that skid steer rocked a little bit, that does not meet the definition of secured. It can't move. Okay, that's what it means. Now, in larger equipment, so equipment over 10,000 pounds, which is why this video is important, most of the material that I'm talking about is commodity specific equipment, meaning stuff that we would put on a trailer, heavy equipment, and it's over 10,000 pounds. Because all the regulations on the federal side are written for that type of equipment. Please keep in mind that most state entities, so state of Minnesota is one of them, in their statutes, and then as well as there'd be other states and the federal regulations in a different part of their regulation book in Title 49 state that no matter what, the equipment can't move and it has to be secured to handle the weight. So this would not meet that definition. So in other words, it doesn't have to meet all the requirements in the federal requirement in how you hook up these devices. And it doesn't, by the way, but it moved. So still got the ticket. Okay, so now what I want you to do is realize that this is in page 3 of your handout, and I'm going to be moving back and forth in that handout if you happen to have that with you. If you don't have it, it was sent out by Catherine. So what you should do is go ahead and download that and print it out, because these are aids that we use in our workforce as well. They're sitting on our website. And so it's a reminder of the requirements. Okay. What I want to point to, if you're looking at that, is you're going to notice right away that the graphic is different, meaning I'm just showing you a box. So this is any type of cargo. Could be equipment, could be a bundle of lumber, whatever it is. But I'm telling you that I want you to hold that equipment, our securement devices, stop it from moving 50% of the weight of the equipment, side to side, forward, rearward, and then 20% of the weight of the equipment with a downward force. Okay, so again, there's the forward, rearward, laterally, and 20% downward force, if not fully contained. Okay, the graphics you guys have in that handout will reference G-force. I am using practical criteria. So I'm moving up out of that and making it more relevant for the people in the field. But the actual G-force requirement is 0.25 G from side to side, 0.5 G to the rear, and 0.435 G moving forward. And G-force means the weight of the equipment. So 1 G would equal the weight of the equipment sitting on the trailer. So the way you would interpret that is if you look towards the rear where I said it's 5G on the left, so that's 50% of the weight of the equipment. That's what you have to stop from holding rearward. But to meet the spirit of the regulation and not have to go through a whole bunch of formulas and everything else, so we will know that it's secured properly and will meet the definition of their securement terms, all you have to remember is you hold that equipment, 50% of the weight of that equipment from moving left or right, so side to side, forward or rearward. Okay, that's what we're going to use. We're going to actually go through a scenario where we talk about that. Then there's 2 different types of securement or forms of securement that we use. And it's going to be indirect tie down, meaning the tie down loops over the top of the cargo. Downward force prevents cargo from moving, and each tie down has 2 anchor points. It's not attached directly to the cargo, it's to the trailer. All right. I will have examples in the end of this presentation where we talk about, are these good enough or not? Excuse me. And what can we do better? That type of thing. So I'm also going to call out, is this direct or indirect? So make sure you understand this. Okay, so indirect loops over the top of the car. Then we also have direct. And again, we work with this. This is one of the main things we work with. So it attaches directly to the cargo. And each tie down has 2 anchor points. Now it's important to remember again that when we talk about commodity specific, the way the regulations call it out, in heavy equipment, you have to use direct tie down, period. And you should go to the main piece of equipment whenever you can. So we'll ferret more of that out here in a second. When we talk about indirect and direct tie down angles, here's an example of what happens with the angles when we start applying them. So the effectiveness of the tie down depends on its attachment angle and the type of securement used. So looking over to the right, indirect, you can see that the higher the angle, the better holding effect I have, right? Of the strap coming down to the trailer over the commodity, whatever it is. If we're tying down heavy equipment or skidsters or the like, then we are using direct. We're going straight to the equipment, and now we want a lower angle. Now, if you look down at the very bottom of that, you can see the 0 angle at 100%. We are not going to be able to do that, okay? And the reasoning here is, remember what the original spirit of the regulation said. Yes, I have to stop it from moving side to side, forward, rear, but I have to hold 20% of that equipment down. If I were to put a chain directly on the trailer to the equipment and tie it down that way, would I be holding it down? I would have nothing holding it down. So I have to go up to that 25%, okay? Notice they go up to 60%. I'm still on the direct side. And you can now, you've taken away your ability to hold the majority of the weight, so you're down to 50%. And you guys should be able to figure that out just by, thinking about, okay, well, the higher the chain gets, if that equipment starts moving, it can move simply because the chain will move with it, right? If one of the chains start to fail, because they're set so high, it can actually move. But if I look down at the 25%, where I can hold 90% of the weight, I have less chance of that happening because it's on a straighter pull towards the equipment. Okay. So thinking about how this works, that's what I'm trying to get at here. So again, in indirect, the higher we go, the better, because we're pushing it down to the trailer and trying to use friction mats or the friction of the trailer or the wood, whatever it is, to hold that commodity in place. But when we talk about direct, so that's a tracked or a tired vehicle, now we are going to keep those angles lower, and we're going to try to work towards pulling it in those, to stop it from moving in those 4 directions. Tie down defined, combination of securement devices that attaches to cargo or equipment to a vehicle or trailer. And it's attached to anchor points. All tie down should have a working load limit. So this is part of your inspection now. So what do I mean by this? I've got a skid steer on a trailer. And so what I'm telling you is where you hook it to the skid steer should be rated. The D-ring should be rated on the trailer. The hooks, whatever you have in your securement device, the chain, the binder, and that extra chain all has to be rated. And you should know the ratings. And then the other thing about it is we're going to get into working load limit in a minute here and what that means, but understand that whatever has the lowest working load limit would be what your device can hold. So if they're not, if it's not all the same type of strength, okay, then that there's a weak link in that system, in that tie down device. So when we say tie down device here, we're talking about a D-ring, a hook point on the skid steer, the chain, the binder, ratcheting binder in this instance, and those hooks, as well as the pins that hold the hook to the chain. They all got to be rated the same. Otherwise, I take whatever's the lower working load limit, which is what we're talking about now. Working load limit is the maximum load that can be applied to a component of cargo securement system. So working load limit is WLL. It's important to remember this because all manufacturers will stamp their devices with a working load limit. And what that means is that is within the working parameter of that device. Working load limit means up to that, whatever that designation is, that's where it will work without failure, okay? So most tie-down components are stamped with the working load limit and the manufacturer assigns it to the device. Because we are working with different manufacturers, we will have different wordings and identifiers of the working load limit. So right now we're looking at a handle of either a ratcheting binder or an over center binder, doesn't matter. But you can see WLL there, right? So there's my working load limit, 5,400 pounds. What I want you to realize is right next to it is MBS. So maximum braking strength. That could also be UBS. So ultimate braking strength. Or if you really want to have fun with it, just say BS. But it's still braking strength, folks, okay? Okay, so but that says 19,000 pounds. So when you look at these devices, you have to know what you're looking at. Generally speaking, now this is it will depend by the manufacturer, okay? Who makes them, the devices. But working load limit in general, in most types of metal components, is either 3, or I should say maximum braking strength is either 3 or 4 times the working load limit. So I can multiply the working load limit times 3 or 4 to arrive at the approximate braking strength. But when we're talking about holding a piece of equipment on a trailer, we have to use working load limit. Maximum braking strength doesn't apply. Okay, because we want to work within the design parameters of that device, which is the working load limit. But maximum braking strength is essentially when that device will come apart and fail for sure. On a chain, so here's an example of a chain. This is a 3/8, grade 8, grade 80, grade 800, AA, alloy. That's an alloy chain, grade 8. There's a hook, it's a 3/8 hook, so it would go to that 3/8 chain. It's important to recognize that that says alloy T80. So now it's T80. 80 again is a designator stating that is a grade 8 hook. However, notice that it's pinned, right? And then the pin is pinned. A couple of important things here. You can't lose that pin and put a bolt in there, not even a grade 8 bolt, not same thing. If you lose that pin, that now becomes your weak point, whatever you put in there. That is not rated the same as the rest of that chain and that hook. You can't do that, okay? And then just for something completely unrelated to this, recognize that if we start talking about lifting chains, which I will bring up again, if you're gonna lift something, it is not a securement device. It is a lifting chain. And lifting chains cannot have that pin and that keeper that you see there. The pin in that hook has to be permanent. It can't have a keeper on it that can be pulled out on a lifting chain. So there's a little bit about a lifting chain. Okay, we get termination device on a strap. There's my 3,300 pounds working load limit. So that's probably a 3-inch strap. Strap is generally, it's about 1,000 pounds working load limit per inch of width, generally speaking. All right, another strap on top. There's a 5,400, so obviously a bigger, better strap. And then there's my D-ring. You are going to be hard pressed to find a D-ring that says working load limit. So this says maximum braking strength, 12,000 pounds. So you got to do a little bit of extrapolating there, or you have to go back to the trailer manufacturer, look in their manual and see what they say is the working load limit. Okay. But because you already know that the working load limit of your other devices, right? You multiply that 3 or 4 times to get at the braking strength or maximum braking strength. So that would kind of help you determine, okay, is this my weak link, the D-ring, or is it actually stronger than the rest? So that's another way to quickly interpret that. And then notice on the bottom, if you can't find a marking anywhere on that chain, on any of those links or the hook or whatever else, the feds Anybody pulling you over and looking at your system would consider that proof coil, which is the weakest form of metal in cargo securement. So here's a chart. This is also in your manual, or excuse me, in your handout. And this would be, I believe, on page 1. So this one's fairly important. You can also look at this in the regulations. But what we're calling out here is the type of material or grade of your chain or binder. This is metal, the size of it, and then some of the designations. And the designations listed on the bottom there, the markings, are not all inclusive. But generally speaking, that's how we try to figure out what they mean. So how you figure this out is, let's say we have a 3/8 grade 8 chain. All I do is I go 3/8 over to the grade 8, which is alloy 8, 80, 800, G8, G80, all designations used. So my working load limit is 7,100 pounds. So I can see right here it's 7,100 pounds, and it should also say it on the device if it's a grade 8. Unless it just says grade 8, then I would use this chart to interpret that, because I need to know that, okay? If you look over at grade 30, that's the proof coil. So look at how the working load limit is lowered on that 3/8 chain. Meaning if I have a chain, or better yet, let's say I have a hook in that chain that I can't find a rating for. There's no rating on it anywhere. According to the feds, I got to consider that proof coil. Well, if all the rest of that tie down system is a grade 8, 7,100 doesn't count. Now we're down to 2,650 because of one component in that system. All right, and then they also have another requirement. This is a confusing one, but hopefully I'll be able to clear it up for you. So right here, we're looking at the aggregate working load limit. So this is the strength of the tie down systems. This is a combination of. So what they're telling us here is the entire tie down system, meaning if I have, let's say I have 4 tie downs on that skid steer, we add them all up. It's got to equal or exceed half the weight of the cargo. So this is where I'm getting into when I told you before that we're going to use a practical application, not what's listed in the regulation, because it's easier to remember and it applies to this, okay? So when we talk about aggregate working load limit, it must equal or exceed half the weight of the cargo when you add them all up, but it's determined by adding together 50% or half the working load limit of each direct tie down, which would be for equipment, right? And or 100% of the full working load limit value for each indirect tie down. So if you're strapping over something, right, you can use 100% of the working load limit, add them all together, and that has to meet or exceed half the weight of whatever you're holding down. However, for direct tie down, we can only take 50% of the devices holding it in each direction. You have to pay attention to that because that in each direction is really important. And again, I'll call that out. Make sure we understand it. All right, so this is a bit confusing. I'm going to go through 2 scenarios now that address this. We're going to start with the indirect tie down. What I want you to realize is that direct tie down situation, when I told you I want to hold half the weight of the equipment from moving forward, rearward, and side to side, if you do that and meet that criteria, you will automatically meet or exceed the aggregate working load limit every time. You do not have to figure it out. So again, that's getting at the practical side of this, how we try to do this. Okay, so an indirect tie down system, something that applies to us maybe, right? We're going to check your understanding here. So this is good old MnDOT right here. We got a big old trailer. We got 25-foot guardrail panels on it. I got 100 of them on there. Well, they each weigh 195 pounds. I'm going to go out to a job. I got to tie these down. So what they're telling us is we have to have our aggregate working load limit must equal half the weight of this load. And then I'm going to tell you what type of component device we're using so that we can figure it out. And so a couple things going on here. First of all, I want you to recognize that this is actually on page 2 of your handout, the requirements for this on the bottom of that page. When we talk about indirect, which I don't have time to go into here, it's all about the number of straps, the length of the material, and then of course, holding half the weight of the equipment. So let's go through a scenario where we talk about this one specifically. So we already know we have to hold half the weight of the equipment. So we got to figure out what is the weight of whatever we have on that trailer. So I just take 195, that's per panel. We have 100. So it's 19,500 pounds. So there's my weight of the equipment, right? Then I'm just going to take that and divide it by half because I have to hold half the weight of this equipment. That's what the requirement is in the aggregate working load limit with all my securement devices. So I'm going to divide it by 2. So now I'm down to 9,750 pounds. That's half the weight. Then I'm going to divide that into my working load limit on my straps because I'm going to use straps. And I know that they're 3,000 pound working load limit. So my question, what we're trying to arrive at here is how many do I need to be able to hold this cargo down safely in the spirit of the regulation? I come up with 3.25. In the world of cargo securement, you do not round down. You always have to round up. So I need 4 straps. Okay. 4 tie downs that I need to put on this trailer. Now, when we talk about this type of a commodity, when you're using indirect, the regulation states, and again, this is, I think, on page 2 of your document, you have to worry about the length of that product as well, if you're going to do this indirect. So we already met the standard for aggregate working load limit. Now we have to go ahead and figure out, well, yeah, but how do I place them? Because I can't just place them anywhere. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at that. Length requirement. And again, this will be called out in the bottom of that page 2 of your handout. So it's not blocked or braced from forward movement and is longer than 10 feet in length. Yes, they're 25 feet in length. It is not blocked, even though you guys probably already know this type of trailer has a little metal bar up there, right? But the definition of blocked or braced on the front, headache rack, whatever you want to call it, is it has to be called out by the manufacturer with a rating. Then not only is it rated, you have to have your product against it. Okay, you can't have it not touching it to use it. And then the other requirement is that it has to meet the height criteria. These guardrails, some of these rails are going right over the top of it because it's only, what, 4 inches high? So it is not a it could help us, but we can't use it in the actual securement of this particular product. Okay, so how are we going to figure this out? Not blocked or braced from forward movement and is longer than 10 feet in length. Okay, so you need 2 tie downs plus 1 additional tie down for every 10 feet or fraction thereof beyond the first 10 feet. That's a mouthful. All that means is I have to have 2 tie downs in the first 10 feet. Okay, so 2 tie downs in the first 10 feet and then 1 tie down within the next 10 feet or every 10 feet thereafter. So if I actually measure this out, this is how they need to be placed. So there's my first 10 feet. Have I met the spirit of the regulation? Yes. Okay. Then on the next 10 feet. Okay, so I have 1 in there. Notice it does not have to be every 10 feet. It's somewhere within that 10 feet. And then finally, the last one is right at the very bottom, and that's only 5 feet in length. But that's that fraction thereof. So I have to have 1 in there and I put it right at that trailer, right before the deck starts to fall down, you know, how you drive equipment up on the trail in that type of trailer. So that would meet the regulation requirements. 4 straps, spaced in the proper distancing. 2 in the first 10 feet, 1 in the next 10 feet, 1 in the next 10 feet or fraction of it. Okay. So now I want to move to direct. That was just a quick look at the indirect, realizing what you have. Again, on page 2 of your handout, you got a whole bunch of different scenarios there. It's based on length of the product and weight of the product, right? It's telling you how many you need. Now we're getting down to that. I always err on the side of safety because I would prefer that you be very careful and say, yeah, I think I got it according to the regulation. But if you just said, I think I got it, throw another one on there. Okay. You do not want to be going down the road, look back in your mirrors and see the equipment falling off the trailer. Okay. Think about it in the extreme. All right. So got a skid steer here with a milling head on it. And so now I'm telling you, I'm giving you a commodity. It is a piece of equipment with tires, so it will be in, direct securement. And I have to hold 50% of the weight of equipment from moving forward, rearward, side to side. And then I have that 20% downward force. Well, if that equipment weighs 12,000 pounds, in this instance it does, so that's just simply half the weight of the equipment is 6,000 pounds. That's what I got to stop from moving forward, rearward, side to side. And then 20% of a downward force is 2,400 pounds. You're not going to have to worry about, in this particular instance, a lot of worry about that 20% downward force, because if you meet, again, the regulations, the 50%, the 4 areas, and you apply the correct angles, in other words, down pressure, angle of the chain and binder moving up to the equipment, you will take care of that 2,400 pounds. Okay? So some things we got to worry about when we're using direct securement. We have recommended tie down placement. There are 8 different points of attachment. Again, not indirect. So if you look at the overhead view of that tractor sitting on that trailer, it hooks to the tractor, the main piece of equipment, and then hooks to the trailer. 4 different devices, 8 different points of attachment. That's what we're talking about there. Okay. Minimum of 2 tie downs holding equipment in each direction. So this is where it gets a little fuzzy for some people out there. So if I look at that, and I'll call that out in my securement exercise coming up here. But if you look at the 2 front chains closest to the truck, they're stopping it from moving backwards, right? The 2 rear chains are stopping it from moving forward. But if I take 2 side chains, either top and bottom, they're stopping it from moving either left or right, or up and down in this instance that we're looking at. My point here is that the feds and the state say, when you talk about acting forces, go back to the definition, it says stop it from moving forward, stop it from moving rearward, stop it from moving side to side. Those are separate acting forces. Okay, you treat them separately. So the angle of that chain and how it's hooked to the equipment back to the trailer matters, which is why you see that 45 to 60 degrees. So you want to try to stay within those parameters. 45 degrees is the best because that's cutting that 90-degree angle in half. But it will still work anywhere from 45 to 60 degrees. And then on the bottom view, now we're talking about holding the equipment down, right? So you got to remember, we want it up around 25 degrees, 25 to 35 to 40 is best, okay? Once you get up into 60-degree angle, that's getting pretty high, and you're starting to pull it down to the trailer more than you're starting to hold it from moving in either left, right, forward, rear, however you want to look at it, directions, which is not what we want. We only need to hold 20% of the weight of equipment down. We have to hold half the weight of the equipment from moving forward, rearward, side to side. So the higher you go with that angle on that bottom graphic, the less you're able to hold it from moving in those 4 directions that they're asking you to. Again, this is just for direct securement. And then you have to secure all accessory equipment. In the graphic you see, that would be the back auger as well as the front bucket. Okay, and we'll get to the scenarios and we'll talk about that. Make sure hydraulic components are at rest. So you could not do this that I just circled. They say the hydraulic components must be at rest. They're either pinned or at rest, one or the other. So that bucket would have to be down on the trailer. You cannot secure that in that type of situation. And then pin articulated equipment to prevent movement. So in this instance, this backhoe, so the arm would have to be pinned. Now, I don't mean pinned up in the up position. It should be down on the trailer and it should be pinned so it can't move side to side. But please recognize all you did is take away the side movement. So now, because it can't move to the side, swing left or right with the pin in it, I still have to secure that back bucket in that arm. But I can use indirect. I can just hold it down. It cannot move up, period. And to make sure we're clear here, because we all work in this workforce where we try to use common sense, right? Well, that's not going to move up, right? If I shut the equipment off, can that move up? Well, just driving down the road, no. If I hit a big enough bump and the hydraulics are leaking, yes. If I tip it over, can it move? Yes. Here's an important lesson. They are telling us, even if you tip over, the equipment stays with the trailer. That's the intent of this securement. So when your world starts to go extremely gray and bad, and you're rolling it over, it's not supposed to break away from the trailer. Okay. All right, so let's look at a tie down exercise. And you guys will have this. The document is just a little bit different, but it is in your handout information on page 4. And I provided that to you so that you can actually use it out in the field. So you can go out and check your equipment if you're wondering if you're doing it right, or if you're meeting the rule or the spirit of the regulations. But we're going to go through one here. So we're going to put a big dozer on a trailer, 54,000 pounds. So that we're talking big, D8 type big. Using a 3/8 grade 8 chain, binder, hook, D-ring, the whole works. So everything in your securement system is 3/8 grade 8. Okay, we're just going to call that out right away. That's what we're using. So you're going to have to use that chart maybe to figure this out. So what we have to figure out here is how many tie downs are needed in each direction. Now, again, remember how the regulation works. They treat moving forward, rearward, and side to side as separate acting forces. And if we bring back in the idea of the aggregate working load limit, they're saying you have to hold half that equipment from each direction, right? Which is what I told you in the very beginning. So when we figure this out, we are figuring out for each direction, not securement devices in their entirety. So the first thing we have to do is figure out, okay, we know we have to hold half the weight of the equipment. So what is half the weight of the equipment, right? So we're just going to take the 54,000 pounds divided by 2. We come up with the 27,000 pounds. So that's what I have to hold in each of the 4 directions, okay? Tie down working load limit, I'm going to divide it into it. I know that I'm using the grade 8 3/8, so that's 7,100 pounds. And that tells me that I need 3.8 tie downs in each direction. Not 4 total. This is based on weight. 4 total is not always what's going to work all the way around. It's based on the weight of the equipment. So I need 3.8 tie downs, meaning I need 4 tie downs in each direction. So you could take your graphic and just draw them in there, but I'm going to draw them in here for you. And then we're going to talk about some of the things we got to think about. Because we can't do this hands-on, I'm just trying to draw out some of the issues that might happen and that you might be able to call out and think about. So how should they be placed in each direction? Well, that's going to be based on where you can hook to the equipment and where you can hook to the trailer, right? It's all about how can we do it. All right, so I just hooked up 4 devices right there. 4 tie down devices, and it's stopping it from moving forward, correct? Hook up another 4 devices. I stop it from moving rearward. So there, I've met the definition of the regulation. When we talk about side to side, I've already got it because we treat these as separate acting forces. So the 4 that are sitting on the top of your screen of this equipment stop it from moving down. And the 4 that are on the bottom stop it from moving up, which would be the side to side, because I can treat them as separate acting forces. So that gets back to why we put these cargo securement devices on at an angle. And again, generally speaking, 45 degrees is what we're trying to shoot for. Okay, so that's what we're getting at. However, some of you might have already caught this, but wait a minute. Based on what you see and how I hooked up, you can't see the side view, but what do you think? Do we have some issues here? So hopefully you guys are talking about this, but right there, if I'm going, I can't go through the blade. So that means I'm going up over the blade, correct? I'd have to. My options are to block that blade up and go under it or go over it. If I go over it, I'm probably side loading the chain on the top of that, excuse me, on the top of that dozer blade. So be careful because you can get in trouble. The definition of the regulations, side loading is supposed to be avoided, but it can't be avoided at all costs, meaning there might be a time where you actually have to side load something. And so you don't have a straight pull with the securement device, but you got to be careful because when you're using linked chain, you can get caught up in those links and it's not securing it properly. So be careful with this if you have to do that, okay? Okay, then the other one is the back. Well, what did I do here? If that's where I can hook up a roller or something to the back of this equipment, so I threw a pin in there, and now I ran two of my devices to it, two of my tie down securement systems. That means that pin and where I'm hooking it has to hold what? If I'm using grade 8 3/8 7100, I've now doubled it because I'm going to the same hook point. Got that in your head? That simply means that, okay, if I'm going to do that, I got to make sure that's rated to be able to handle that. So 14,000 at least, right? $7,100, $14,200. That's what it would be. It's got to be able to be rated to hold that, or I should be hooking two different systems to that point. So that's what we're trying to get at. Do not side load. I already talked about this briefly, but if we're looking what side loading means in some situations, again, try to avoid it. So the one on the left is correct. It's a straight pull, right? And it's also important that the extra slack in the chain is in the middle of the actual tie down device. So the ratcheting or over center binder. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But looking at the other one, old trailer, old equipment. And so we're side loaded right where you see the circle. That is not securing that equipment. I've taken away my ability to hold that equipment in place. I should not be securing to that 3-point hitch in that point. I should find a better spot back at the tractor, whether it be the axle or whatever, and get a better direct pull on that chain. Because that right there isn't securing much of anything. So that's side loading, okay? We want to do something like that. Okay, watch what happens here in the looping a chain. This is kind of a term that patrol calls it that, and so I just picked up on it. But again, if you look at the securement device on the left, you can see that it's a straight pull. The chain comes around the D-ring and hooks on itself, and on the other end of it, it hooks directly to that skid steer, right? Now, there's a couple of things wrong with the picture on the right, the graphic on the right. We don't want to do that. The first thing that you should automatically tell is, and we can't see the overall equipment, so in other words, all the devices, but this is securing directly to the side. There is no 45-degree angle here. It's directly from the side of the equipment to the side of the trailer. So I don't have the angles I need. And then if you look down over the edge of the trailer, which let me just go ahead and provide you a close up here, I think. Yeah, okay. So look at how this is hooked up. It's hooked up to a frame, probably a bucket frame or something on the front of that tractor. It comes down, hooks onto the binder, but then goes through the binder, through the D-ring on the trailer, back over the edge of the trailer and up to the binder. That, folks, is not secured. I have to take the hook and hook it on the chain itself and pull all the extra slack of the chain to the center. It should be resting between the binder. Because of the way that's hooked there, that can slide back and forth. And of course, it starts a whole nother issue with looking at where it comes up over the trailer. Now, this is an old trailer, so it's an old type of securement. But so would I be better off, again, how do we think in securement? Would I be better off hooking the chain on itself and have one chain going up over the edge of that trailer? Most definitely. Now I have two, so it can get caught on two different links. That's another problem because I'm working off the edge of that trailer, which I really don't want to do, but that's where my D-ring is. So all types of different securement situations you got to worry about. You got to try to always think about what is the best way and do that. All right, thinking about terminations then on our trailers. So here's your making your brain melt again, because I've seen a lot of this. And I want to point out here right at the beginning, none of the three that you see are illegal, A, B, or C. Again, that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to get you to think, what is the safest? Okay, what is going to cause less failure? That's what we're getting at here. How do you think? So it's the thought process. So if you look at A, B, and C, there's three different ways to tie through that, what we would call a rub rail. All right, number one, rub rails should not be used as securement devices. So I should not go outside that plate steel there. That's essentially what the feds say. They don't say you can't. They say you shouldn't. The definition of a rub rail is if you end up going around a corner or hit something that it rubs against that metal, but it doesn't tear off the device. So just by definition, your device should be on the inside of that. That's what they're talking about. That's what a rub rail is. However, if you can get into the manufacturer requirements for this trailer and they rate that rub rail, you could hook to it. Okay, that's not breaking any regulation, but always best to hook on the inside. Okay, thinking in terms of safety. Okay, so if using those stake pockets shown, we're not going to use a rub rail. We have this chain and a hook, so we have to figure out how to use it in the stake pockets. So now, how should I do it? So what you should be asking yourself is, okay, the top one we see a lot of, where they wrap around and then put the hook on the top. Couple of things about that. First off, oh, well, that's a good idea because now the hook, it would have to bounce out. It just can't fall out if something loosens up. So that's a good thing, right? But we are wrapping around that device. That is a stake pocket. The bottom one, we're just hooked to the bottom of the stake pocket and pulling up. Or not the bottom one, B, excuse me. And then finally C, we're just wrapping around the stake pocket and hooking the chain back on itself. Which way do you think is the best? I'll give you 10 seconds. Figure it out. All right, I'm sure you all agreed, right? It's got to be C. And that's because if over a period of time, if you've worked in this industry at all, using those top two that way, over a period of time, you're going to bend that plate steel for that pocket and you might rip it off. You could also cause some side loading in the hook in B. You'd be tip loading in A, you'd be tip loading the hook, and you'd be running the chain on over a couple of metal edges. So C would be the best out of these three scenarios. Just wrap it around and hook it back on itself. So we're not going to bend anything, even though, yes, there's still always a possibility over a period of time that we can bend that part of that steel in that pocket, stake pocket. It's going to be the best scenario. Okay. So what we would like to do now is I'm going to give it back to Catherine, and if anybody wrote in anything, we can talk about that. And as soon as we're done with that, I'm going to go to the scenarios and we're going to have some discussion about that. Two serious graphics here, and then one, the lower one that's, yeah, that is not secured, by the way, the sand. So that didn't work. Figure you might have a laugh at that. So I'll turn it over to Catherine now.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I know Katie Hansen not to call you out, but she rose her hand during the CDL portion. So I don't know if you want, Katie, if you want to unmute yourself and ask Brian your question.
Yep, I had a question about, sorry, I might be getting an echo. We got somebody in the other room. The self-certification form, I kept my school bus endorsement, and with that, I need to keep a medical card. So I'm always confused on what to put for that self-certification form. I don't know if you have any, I usually try to do interstate with medical. I don't know if that's correct.
Yes, so you're questioning because you have a bus endorsement and you are required to carry the medical card, which one should you be choosing? There could be some argument about interstate versus intrastate for a bus company, and I'm not familiar with that, but because you are considered interstate, working for a county, city, or state, you're already in that category, so your only option is option 1 or 2, and it sounds like you chose option 1, and that would be correct.
Okay, yeah, I was sure I was covered. I work for MnDOT, and then I have Class A, and wanted to make sure I was covered correctly on that.
Yep. And so that, yeah, you essentially are picking the broader category, meaning you can cover anything with that. So you are category 1, interstate, have to have the medical card. So you're covered. That would be correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Charles Anderson, you're up. You can go ahead and.
Can you hear me?
We can move on,
Yes.
Catherine?
Okay,
No, Charles Anderson has a question.
Oh, okay.
just real quick, we were thinking about getting a dump trailer at some point. I could not remember the requirements for tie downs in a dump trailer if we were gonna load a skid loader inside of it.
That, so you're gonna try to put a skid loader inside of a dump trailer. So essentially you would have what, 3 sides on it?
Yes, with the back, to close, but that's a hinge door.
Okay. So yeah, that's a good question. You remember that the downward force part is going to be a problem, but because you don't have a top on it, right?
Right.
So you might have to worry about that. That's how I look at that. But more importantly, if you, for instance, that you're talking about there, it's not going to fit in there snugly, meaning it's not, the tires aren't going to rub against the side. And then it depends on where you put it in there, because remember, we don't want to overload the equipment that we're operating to get this equipment down the road, meaning be able to pull it all the way up forward against the front of the box. But if that is overweighting your front axle, you shouldn't do that, right? So we're trying to distribute weight accordingly as well. So what you might do is use blocking or bracing. So put blocks in there, and now the blocks aren't supposed to move. Be mindful of that. But if you block it so it can't move forward, rearward, or side to side, because you have the sidewalls on it, you would meet the spirit of the regulation. But it still can't move. The easiest thing to do, the easiest thing that I would recommend is go ahead and put some D-rings in there. Now be careful, because rated D-rings, and you got to have a certified welder. You can't have anybody weld them in there because it's got to have a rating. But with that would probably be your safest bet. And the only reason I'm saying that is, again, it's not only about what the requirements of the regulation are. If you tip that truck over, that piece of equipment's coming out. If it's somebody, you're going to get sued. So the way I would read that into that is be safe as you can. So I'd try to secure it somehow, get that 20%. And then at the same time, of course, you're going to take care of the blocking or bracing type issue. So that would be the best scenario, unless you're going to haul it on a different trailer.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But again, I want to make sure I'm clear here with you folks. I'm in no way, shape, or form am I saying that's the requirement by the regulation. Because it's going to depend on the weight of that equipment. We got to go back to, is it 10,000 pounds or more? All right, because then it has to have the 4 devices, 50% of the weight and all the rest of the stuff. If it's under 10,000 pounds, you would secure it in the same way, even though they're not telling you have to, because they're telling you it can't move. No matter what the weight of the equipment is, it can't move. Okay, so that's what I'm working off here. You're not going to find anything commodity specific that talks about how you would have to do that in your particular scenario.
Okay, any more questions? Otherwise, we'll move on to the scenarios, which will involve polling. So be on the lookout for the polling questions. Anyone else? Okay, well, Brian, I guess we move on, and feel free to enter if you think of it later.
Yeah, because, you know, obviously in this format, we don't have an opportunity to do hands-on, which of course, how this audience works best with that. So what I'm going to do is try to get you to think how I think, which can be frightening, by the way. But so you got to think about different securement situations. How you think about it does matter. And again, we know just through human factors that some people have, what would I call it, a higher level of safety thinking than others. It's just the way it is. It's how people think. It's differences in people thinking. But what I need you to do is always look back after you've got it secured and say, did I meet the regulation? Do I think this is going to be safe? And not say, it's good enough. Because the minute you tell me that, if it were me and an officer, I'd be going back to look at what you did. Okay? You have to know if it's good enough. That's really what this amounts to here. So I'm going to show you 10 different securement scenarios. And I'm going to work with Catherine here, and she's going to let you guys go ahead and, I don't know, what's it called, Karen? Not a rating.
Poll.
Yeah.
A poll.
Okay. Poll, yeah. And so, you know, try to get you involved here a little bit. And then what I'll do is I'll talk after we do the poll and state, okay, here's what we got to worry about here. So I'll point out things, or I'll say, yes, it's good, whatever. And I want you to use what you just learned here, as well as your best judgment when viewing these scenarios. And again, remember now, if you need, I don't want you to go the other way either. If it needs 4 securement devices to be legal, and I don't need you thinking, well, I'm going to put 8 on to make sure it never moves. We can't go in that direction either, because now we're talking about possibly wasted time, wasted effort, too many securement devices roaming around because you're in a just in case scenario, right? So we have to stay in the middle here, but it's how we think and that we want to be safe. That's kind of what I'm getting at. So what I need you to do with these scenarios is decide if it is a form of direct or indirect securement, and then decide if it could be better secured. And I believe what we're going to poll is, can it be better secured? So when that comes up, we need to, you know, just look at it and go ahead and punch something in. And we're not watching you to see if you know, you're failing or anything, so let's not worry about that. But and again, some of these are going to be hard to see because obviously I'm giving you a picture on a screen. Realistically, you would need to walk around the equipment and look at everything. But for the purposes of what we're attempting to do here, this should work. Okay, I'm gonna trip you up a little bit. I'm gonna start with good or not so good for 2 screens here. And it's related to securement, but yet it's not direct securement. So let's go ahead and pull this one. We're not worried about direct or indirect right here. We're worried about it that this could be done better. So what you're looking at is hooking the trailer to some type of pulling device, and these are the safety chains and the breakaway cable for the brakes on the trailer. I'm wondering what you think. Could it be done better?
Okay. Okay, I just launched the poll, so I'll give you guys 15 seconds or so. Okay, I'm going to close it and launch the results. So 97 said not good.
Okay. Good. Okay, do you close that screen, Catherine, or?
I already did.
Okay, I must just have to get rid of it on mine. Okay. So, good. That would be the correct response. But now the problem is I'm not talking directly to all of you. So, I mean, we can certainly take questions once we're done with the 10 of these. The main issue here is that breakaway cable cannot be hooked to anything that hooks the trailer to the truck. So not the safety chains, not the pin, none of it. A breakaway cable for a brake system has to be hooked to the pulling unit in a completely separate spot. So that's what I'm attempting to call out there. The rest of it is hard to see because of the way that the chains are wrapped in there and you can't see the whole chain length. But so anyway, that's what I was looking for there. So there it is. We got to have that hooked somewhere else and preferably towards the frame of the truck or the bumper of the truck, something like that, or the pulling device, pulling unit. All right, so here's another one. This is obviously more heavy duty. So what do you think? And there's actually a couple things wrong here. But is it okay?
Okay.
A little more dissension in the ranks.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close the poll. And I'm sharing the results. So 73% said not good.
Okay. So again, remember, some of this is, you know, you guys are working out in the field and you're not sitting in reading regulations book. And quite frankly, if you are, you're probably falling asleep trying to read it. But when we look at what's happening here, there's a couple of things. So first off, that chain right there isn't straight. You cannot twist chains or put knots in chains in whether you're securing cargo or whether you're doing something like this, hooking up a trailer. And I see a lot of this because the chain is too long for the particular unit they're hooking to. So they twist the chain or they put a knot in the chain. You can't do that. Chains are designed to be on a straight pull. So if you look at the chain closest to you here, right here, can you guys see my arrow, Catherine?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so you can see how these links are twisted just a little bit, and it's twisting as it goes along. We shouldn't even have that. Every one of these should line up, line up, line up, line up, all the way through it as best you can. So obviously that's not occurring here. So this is where it's going to fail if this trailer drops, because the chain will not pull right and it's going to break. Okay, the other thing is the feds specifically call out now in the regulations that all safety chains for trailers have to be crossed. There's no option. They have to be. So that would be the other thing that's wrong with this scenario. You can't hook them direct like that. They got to go under where we're hooking up to the pintle hook. And the main reasoning there is if we have a pintle hook failure, that front of that trailer is still cradled by the chains instead of hitting the road. Okay. And then one other thing, as long as we're on this particular graphic here, understanding that there are differences between hooking up trailer safety chains and cargo securement. When we hook up trailers, these two chains, okay, this is one of the very few times that they actually call out and state you have to use the braking strength or minimum braking strength or ultimate braking strength of these chains, not the working load limit. So the manufacturer, when they build the trailer, will have to meet the regulations. So you should be fine if they're the original chains. Whatever the gross vehicle weight rating of that trailer is, those two chains added together will hold it, that weight, if you have that much weight on there. But they're using braking strength, meaning it's gonna have to go above that before these chains break. So we're not using working load limit in this instance, okay? So just so you're aware of that, one of the very few places where they do that. If you went out and changed your chains on your trailer, you probably messed it up. So just be mindful of that. These chains on trailers for safety chains have to meet certain definitions and regulations. So proper braking strength, as well as how they're hooked up. You can't just weld a chain to the side of that trailer. That would not be proper. Okay, so let's get into some securement then. So the first thing is, what type of securement are we looking at? And then could this be better secured? So is it direct or indirect? What's already hooked up to it? And then could it be better secured? Ooh, look at that.
Okay, looks like our voting has slowed, so I'll just go ahead and end it. And there's a result. So 95% said direct and 93% said yes.
Okay, so pretty good. And that would be correct. Let's go ahead and look at this. So when we're looking at the securement devices on there, it's very hard to see if they're all proper, other than we know that we can see at least 3 devices that are directly secured to this equipment, right? Since it's got tires on it, that's what we have to do. So we still don't know if they're rated properly, and we can't see exactly how we tied everything up around the D-rings and everything. But what would trip you up here is, remember what I said about the devices themselves, both this backhoe and this front bucket have to be secured as well. So that's why it could be better secured. Now, again, the back bucket, if you can pin it, drop a pin in there so that it can't swing left or right, then I could use indirect securement and wrap something up over that boom or that bucket and just hold it down. If I'm not able to put a pin in there and I can't lock that from moving left or right, the backhoe part, the boom and stick, then that would mean that I would have to hook directly to that bucket somewhere or to the arm by the pins of the bucket, and one device to each side, because I have to stop it from moving side to side and up and down. And then looking at the front bucket, because it's attached directly to the tractor and it can only move up, I can use indirect and go up over the top of that, the arms for the bucket, and secure it down. That's the 20% thing again. Okay, So your securement devices, if you have all the same type on the trailer, you probably have 3/8 grade 8 or something like that, maybe even grade 100, I don't know. But that would take care of that easily. And a 3/8 chain is, you know, user friendly. But those two pieces of that equipment, appendages, however you want to look at it, need to be tied down. That's what the regulations are telling us. So it's not just the 4 to the main piece of equipment at that point. Okay, how about this one? Type of securement, could it be better secured?
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll. And it's unanimous. 100% said direct and yes.
Excellent work. That is correct. So couple of things wrong here, right? We can see that we have the 2 securement devices in front. Looks like they're angled. You know, again, we can't tell everything about them, but it looks like it's fairly decent. But the bucket is not on the trailer. We have hydraulic pressure. And then we didn't secure the bucket down. And in this instance, we could use indirect. And then I did want to point out at the very front here, where we're looking at that piece of steel in the front of the trailer again. That would not be a form of securement, even if I tuck that bucket underneath there. Okay. Unless that is rated and it can handle 20% of the weight of those arms in that bucket, that is not a form of securement. So again, it's about what does the manufacturer say about components on that trailer. So some of you might notice if I had a top view here, if I try to lower that bucket, it's going to start hitting those chains that are already going up to the main tractor. So now what do I do? So if you run into this situation, there's a couple things that we've learned at MnDOT. And one of them is when we order trailers, we don't get D-rings every 4 or 5 feet. We get D-rings every 2 feet. Every 2 foot going all the way down that trailer. Because while that angle that we attached there is fine, I could have moved 2 foot backwards and the bucket would have rested down properly between those chains, my securement devices, and I could have secured it. My only option at this point, if I can't move that backhoe on the trailer, is to tie somewhere into the pockets on the rub rail or to block that front 3-way bucket or 4-way bucket. And so put 6x6s under it and get it up a little bit higher and then chain it down so it doesn't hit the main chains going back to the tractor. Okay, which is kind of a pain. So that'd be a form of block and bursting. I would block it up so it doesn't hit my securement devices going rearward, and then go ahead and use indirect going over the top of the bucket to hold it down.
Before we move on, Brian, a question came in from Tom.
Excuse me?
Oh, I said before we move on, we have a question that came in on that from the last previous scenario 4.
Okay.
Yep. So the question is, do stabilizers need to be secured in up position?
Stabilizers. Are you talking about the back stabilizers? Is that what we're referring?
Ms. Riggs, do you want to unmute yourself?
Downriggers.
Yep, the back stabilizers, the outriggers.
I think I'm gonna
Could you
check.
repeat that?
So what we'd be talking about are these,
Correct.
correct? Good. That's a good question. Well, you know what? So now we get to choose, because I'm just going to show you this and you got to do your survey first. So now you have to throw that in there and guess at that. And we'll talk about it.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll. And there's your results. 85% it's secure or direct, and 95 said yes.
Okay. Now remember that we're actually, when we want to know if it's direct or indirect, we're actually looking at what you see, what's already secured. So this is direct. Again, going straight to the main equipment. So this is like I had already talked about before, pinning the equipment. So in this instance, the backhoe needs to be pinned so it can't move left or right. And then we would need indirect securement on that bucket back there so it can't raise up, right? So that's what would be missing there, so it could be better secured. And then I'm pointing down at the system on this side, and I think my next graphic shows it. But before we go there, let's go ahead and talk about these outriggers. Outriggers are pretty much excluded by omission, meaning there's no mention of them, okay? They do not need to be secured if they remain in the upright position, because they're not higher than the main equipment, okay? What you would be worried about is if you had an old piece of equipment and you know it either leaked through the seals or whatever was happening, that those outriggers would start to come down as you're going down the road. Then the answer is yes, they have to be secured. But if they stay up where they're supposed to be, they do not need to be secured. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so here's a close-up of that chain. So what I'm specifically looking at is this one right here now. So the reason we have a problem here, which you couldn't see before, but when you look at what's happening here, in this particular instance, the chain is wrapping around the device. This hook is just resting in here. We just put it in there. But the chain wraps on itself, which is correct, and goes up to the binder. But what happens then is this loops through, okay? And again, we can't have that. So what's missing here is this chain, this part, these two right here, this has a hook in here somewhere. It's got to come up and turn around and be hooked on this. And one chain is coming back to this binder and all the extras just laying here in the middle. So this would not be either direct or indirect because it's not directly securing it. It can move back and forth. We don't want to do that, okay? So just be mindful of that. A couple of times we've seen that. Okay, how about this one? Direct or indirect, and could it be better secured? This one's a little bit tougher. Looks like some indecisiveness out there.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll.
Okay, so
Results.
we have some people that still might think that's indirect, so that's good. We'll talk about that. Could it be better secured? Good job. Yes, it actually could. This is one of those, this falls into that gray area, okay? So remember that what's missing here in all these scenarios is we're not inspecting these devices, which of course, I might remind you that in the handouts that I provided, there is information on how to inspect a chain and all that kind of thing, right? So it's not just what's the working load limit and are they all rated the same? It's also how banged up are they or how wore out are they? So just keep that in mind, whether it's the hook or the chain base and the links or whatever it is. But when you look at this, this is a form of direct, okay? So it is direct securement. They have one binder or securement system on all four corners, and they're pulling the same, which is important because you got to remember, if this is the way I'm going to pull it towards the front of the tractor trailer, I have to do the same thing in the rear of it, right? Otherwise, the acting forces aren't going to work because I got to stop it from moving side to side, forward and rearward. So that's number one. But attaching to tracks or grousers is always a little iffy. And when you're, again, you can't see this in this graphic, but please understand that where they're hooking into those grousers up there, they're side loading that hook. They have to be. There's no way to hook the hook in the angle that you see coming at you here in this closest tie down securement device, meaning up here. That hook is not moving this way. It's got to be hooked in this way, and we're pulling it sideways. That is not how devices are supposed to be used. Hooks are supposed to be used to secure devices at the base of the hook and in a direct line. So try to do that as much as you can, okay? So this is direct securement, but it could be better secured. So here's the issue. When we look at how they did it, this angle is okay, but the tracks are wider than the trailer. And whenever you get into this instance, it's almost always better to cross the chains, meaning go from over here this way and go from over here underneath it this way. So now I could attach somewhere in here and come across to here. And it's perfectly legal to cross those securement systems. The other thing is be aware that this track, 80% of this track has to be on this trailer. And it's hard to see. You can't see how much of it is off here, but they might have to put out their devices here and put a piece of wood on here because you have to have 80% of this track sitting on a flat part of the trailer. That's a requirement. Only 20% overhang on both sides. All right. So the other thing is it a good idea to attach the tracks? Well, it is if that's all you have. Okay. But in this instance, they have more. So this is not a good form of securement. And then finally, we got a bent handle, don't we? We should not have a bent handle. So patrol would tell you to take this out of service. Bent handle means that the metal has been compromised in some way. And so the working load limit or braking strength, if that's what you want to think about, is compromised because it's been bent. Okay, stretched, however you want to look at it. All right, same piece of equipment. This is a long stick hoe, but now we're looking at what they did with the stick part of it. So we're on the, where it's resting on the trailer towards the back. And so we need to know if that is direct or indirect and whether you think that's a good form of securement. Could it be done better? Catherine, I see we've got a few minutes left, but I want to pick it up a little bit so that I can, if
Okay.
there are a few questions, maybe we can get to them, so.
Okay, I'll just go ahead and close the call.
Okay, so most everybody's saying it's indirect. That would be correct. Could this be better secured? Oh, well, we're not sure there, are we? So let's look at it. So it is indirect because it's going up and over, and you can see down here that they've got it braced. It's blocked here so that they can rest it on something and then they secure it with the devices. So it is indirect, but there's a few issues. So the first one is, if you look at the outside arrows, they have it hooked on the front side of the D-ring and back here on the back side. It should be hooked in the same spot, always trying to keep, when we talk about securement, we're always trying to keep equalized pressure. So essentially what that means is if it bounced at all, it's conceivable that that hook could wrap up over that D-ring and loosen up. It would loosen up the strap. Should be on the same side. Okay, so it should be on the back side here, or change this one to the front side, one or the other. Then if you look in the middle, this is metal, this is a strap, so there should be some form of protection there. So using this is fine, but they should be protecting the edges. And then you can see right here, it's very hard to see, but this strap is compromised. So when we talk about straps, it's the compromised part of the strap is based on the width of the strap and how many places are compromised. Again, that's listed right in the regulations. That's not hard to find, but when it comes to straps. And then finally, keep in mind that since we're holding this down and we assume that they have locked the boom side to side, otherwise they couldn't do it like this. And by the way, you can see the lock here between the stick and the boom, right? So that's good. But also that does that strap, and we don't know what it is, I'm not giving you that, but what is it, a 3-inch strap? What's the working load limit and what's the weight of that boom and that stick? Because they have to hold 20% of it. So there's also a question about whether they're using a big enough strap, okay, for their indirect securement. So all things to think about. What do you think? I'll give you a hint. It shouldn't take you long to decide. How about that? You can go ahead and close it, Catherine. All right, not bad. Now we have some dissension for the direct indirect, and that's for good reason. And this is actually neither. Okay, remember, indirect is you hook from one side, go up and over and hook to the other. We're not doing that here. And it's not direct because we're not even hooking to the D-rings and then hooking to the equipment. We're just hooking to the equipment and running it through the D-rings. So this is would be a big no-no. That's how I would look at this, all right? So I don't think I should have to tell you. Remember, when we hook to 4 points of something that we're putting on a trailer, it's tired or tracked, 4 separate points of attach, 4 separate systems, 8 points of attachment. We're not meeting that definition here at all. Catherine, we're running out of time. Should I just quickly go through these and explain them and call it?
Yeah, I would just. run
Okay.
through them quick.
So this one here is acceptable. We crossed the chains, but it's not as wide as the trailer, so we didn't need to. But again, on the far left, we're looking at where we didn't hook the chain on itself, which should have occurred, or just hook the hook in it like you see here. Both of these chains are twisted as they move up. You can see the links turning. We don't want that. That's not how a chain works. We want to straighten those out. And then we're tip loading the hooks. So this would be better if we just ran the hook from here to here. That would be a better scenario. And we take a lot more of the securement system out of the equation as well. So less chance for failure. And then finally, this one, and I want to throw this in there just to go back to the indirect. So this is all indirect, but recognize that they did it differently. So Jersey barrier sitting on a trailer, they hooked to a D-ring, they hooked to a stake pocket, not good. They went under the trailer and hooked, not good. They did that 3 times here. And this one they did fine by hooking on the edge of the trailer. So all indirect, but now our other problem is the issue of going over those Jersey walls in concrete. So these straps should be protected. The chain is fine, straps should be protected. Okay. So keep your cargo secured under all conditions, meaning if you tip it over, it stays with the trailer. This, they actually didn't mean to do this, but it got away from them. Watch the tractor, by the way. Don't leave your plow pins, hammers, and chains in the cab. Watch that cab go over. That would be coming at you, folks. Keep all our eyes and faces looking good, right? That's a lot of stuff flying around in that cab. All right, operators, you tie down cargo using direct and indirect securement requirements. Check the cargo devices after the first 50 miles, 3 hours, 150 miles, which is not going to occur for most of us. So what I recommend is get it all secured, do a figure 8 or do a circle in your yard before you leave, get out and check one more time and make sure they're all tight. And then if they are, get out on them. Think safety. So wrapping it up here, keep up with the CDL requirements. Don't text. Pull off the road if you're going to use a cell phone. Even if your supervisor says, I want to be able to get a hold of you on a cell phone, don't be driving when you do it. Pull to the shoulder, pull into a safe location. When securing equipment, follow the 3 basic rules. Stop it from moving forward, rearward, laterally, or side to side. If not enclosed, you got to provide a downward securement force. And then again, the number and strength of the tie downs must be sufficient for the weight of the cargo. And then just keep in mind that we are talking about CDL regulations. So these people are out there. I took pictures of them. Just be careful. Don't be around them. All right, well, thanks for your time. I need to be quiet because I'm a little past time here. I hope it helped you all. And I do have my number in that handout if you do need to reach out to me. Karen, I'll turn back,
Yes,
or
thank you
Catherine,
so
I'll turn
much.
back to you.
Yes, thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for attending and participating in any of our virtual demo day sessions. I did put a link in the chat box to a survey, so it'd be great if you just took a couple minutes to fill that out. It's really helpful for planning our next year's event, which we will at this point definitely in person. So again, thank you again, everyone, for participating today and in all of our past sessions. And Brian, thank you.